This episode here today on YouTube is all about intuition. What is that? Why is it important? Why do you care? Why should you care? And what intuition comes down to is, how much do you trust yourself and your life experience? And is that reasonable in this moment or this decision to be made? Can you trust yourself? And some of these questions. So, let's get to it. Let's have some conversations about intuition here. So intuition comes up a lot with a whole range of situations, whether dealing with personal matters, things with other people, things to do with work, education, everything. And so what is intuition then? What is it? Intuition is essentially this built-in mechanism that we have as humans. Who knows if other animals have it as well? Maybe you'd call it in animals their instincts. And what it is this cumulative concoction and amalgamation of our entire lives and the experiences we've had, the successes, the failures, setbacks, wins, what have you, and it amalgamates, and it's our brain's way of synthesizing these things down into your intuition, your initial judgment, or your sense of a situation. And it can be initial, it can be more pronounced initially, it might, and it's certainly there for long-term decisions as well. Maybe you're contemplating something for weeks, months, even years, and the whole time your intuition is saying one thing and your present self has been questioning it along the way. But intuition, when it comes up when you're faced with something new or some decision to be made, to make the call, your intuition can be on your side and aligned with how you're perceiving it, your sense of it, your beliefs, the logic of it, or the pragmaticism of it, or it might not. And it's generally when it's not is when people, and I'm not going to use the word run into problems, because it can have both good or bad outcomes if it's not. But it's when there's a disconnect there, or a disalignment with some logic, pragmatic thought, and your intuition, is when people begin to really question it and to look at, okay, what's going on here? How am I going to decide? So let's look at that a little bit more, or let's just think on it and talk to it for those listening. So when your intuition is aligned with your present self and your beliefs about the situation, people tend to question it a little less, and they'll make that call. It tends to be a little bit quicker than when there's a disconnect there. Maybe we'll start with one where there was a disconnect first. Recently, I signed on with a new marketing partner for this company that I'm running here. And my initial gut feeling was, there's no way I can afford that. This is way too expensive to do this much for marketing. I can do it, 80% as good myself. Why would I pay to have somebody market for me? And that was my initial reaction. And over the course of several months of doing various forms of marketing, this YouTube video being one of them, I was doing research. I was looking at anecdotal stories from people, browsing forums on Reddit, watching YouTube videos, seeking advice from friends and family, reading articles, everything to just help form my opinion. because, you know, I'm a pretty kind of cheap person, or frugal maybe, whatever the nice version of that word is. I don't like letting go of my money very easily, especially if I don't understand exactly what I'm paying for or what I'm going to get out of the payment or get out of my money. I like to know that when I buy something, I'm going to get if it's something like this, I'm going to get a return on it. However, with certain things, marketing with businesses, they tend to be a bit of a leap of faith, especially for someone like myself who's never done anything like this before or was contemplating this decision. And so my initial reaction, my intuition, was completely against paying for marketing. My initial marketing budget for this company was $35 a day or a month Psychology Today profile, and that was it. And I was pretty confident that that was going to work based on my past knowledge, past research I had done. And then when faced with reality of trying to grow my little business here, over months, it was that reality, not that it was entirely wrong, but it was not working out the way that I wanted it to. So I began to explore other options, and initially the cost of marketing really took me back. I think I did some inroads of some beginning research into what it would look like, realized the cost, and said, no, there's no way I'm going to be doing that. I'll do it myself, save the money. Just I got time to use. And then I kind of stopped doing research and committed to that idea for a month or two, and then came back to the idea of, after a month or two, not really getting anywhere, like a little bit, more accelerated, but it still wasn't satisfying me. So I came back to the drawing board, and that's when my intuition was still saying, no, it's too much money. You don't need to do that. But this pragmatic or logical side of myself, as I did more and more research, began to at least consider it. And as that time went on, I began to accept the fact that I have to do another leap of faith here. When it comes to marketing, especially a new business, there's no real guarantees any one marketer can make. But they can promise that they'll do their best, that with other businesses there's been successes. And as I contemplated these things and met with people, got a sense of who they were, trying to see if they were an authentic person and they stood by what they said through their mannerisms, through their speech, their tone, their body language. I just had several meetings over months with people until I got a sense of I might not necessarily be guaranteed that these things will for sure work for me, but I have a sense of trust that this person is saying what they're saying is true, and that they do have my best intentions in mind. And so, despite my intuition initially really not liking the idea of having to spend a bunch of money, I could do things myself, continue down that path, not really seeing the value of someone doing marketing. Through research, I was able to align that essentially with my present self. And now I'm very comfortable with the idea of it. If you'd asked me 8 months ago, I might be shocked or surprised that this video was online, but it is something that I'm quite aligned with, very pleased with the results. It was certainly a leap of faith, certainly, but it worked out. And it was my intuition's initial reaction and disagreement that sparked me to do some of this research or to continue on, because it was a new reality and a new challenge, and my intuition was not necessarily prepared for that, but I tilt towards frugality, cautiousness, I guess traditionally being conservative in that manner, where rather than taking a leap of faith and hoping, I'd like to at least take an educated guess for essentially everything in my life. Maybe not an educated guess, but to do what I can with the knowledge that's available to me. And it might take a little bit longer, but that way I'm a bit more comfortable with the decision when it comes to. And through that process, eventually my present self and my present understanding of how business works, how people work, began to become aligned with that intuition of, okay, and I shouldn't say that it became aligned, but my initial discomfort was lessened through that research and just being pragmatic about it. When these things come up, and when I was struggling with this disalignment of these two sides of myself, my amalgamation of my life's knowledge, giving me a sense of feelings, sparking me to ask questions about, can I really commit to this? Is it reasonable? Does it make sense given the circumstances? And I was asking myself, which side do I trust more? Well, I trust my intuition for a lot of things, I really do. But I also knew that this was very new. And so I also trusted my ability to go there and figure it out for myself as to what I think the best call would be. And when it comes to intuition, this sense we have of whether we're making the right decision or not. Think of a decision that's to be made, and the big question is this thing something that's new to me? Have I experienced something just like this before? And if not, then how can your intuition be fully capable of solving that issue for you and relying on it solely? Because your intuition is from the past. It exists in the present. It certainly does. But what it's compelling you to feel or think or believe is grounded in past truths that it's discerned over time. And whether or not those past truths are even true themselves, they might be quite true for you and how you perceive things. But whether or not they're true at all in reality or to other people is a whole nother question and topic. But it is past oriented. And so when there is something new, even if it might feel wrong or uneasy or you're unsure of it at that moment, it's worthwhile to spend some time reflecting with yourself, asking yourself the questions, why, what evidence is there to support the idea of whether I favor this thing or disfavor it? What about this situation is similar to things that I've done in the past, or just past stories that I've read about or have learned, like life lessons? As I was going through that example, there's this tendency to not initially, I'm a skeptical person. I'm not pessimistic, but I approach things with skepticism and to not initially trust things or people until they've proven themselves in some way. And it's not anything big or anything like that, but in some small ways before I fully trust somebody or circumstances. And when this is happening, I am aware of it. It's intuition. Like I tilt towards skepticism tilt towards maintaining the status quo, if you will, not taking risks, or not taking uncalculated risks. And that is both a strength and a weakness at times. There's a good chance if I had listened to some of my friends at the very beginning of this business venture that I'm on, that who were saying from the get-go, pay for marketing, it's worth it. I might be much more advanced in where I am. I might not be here making this video though, so I don't have regrets, but I can acknowledge that the weakness of my skepticism and demand to have more educated guesses than not makes the process a bit slower for almost everything. But when it comes to intuition, it's so hard for me to just sit here and say, you gotta trust yourself or trust your present self, or both. And there's no right or wrong answer as to whether a decision that's being made is going to be aligned. Is it better to have it aligned with your intuition or not, or your present self? However, in saying that, you're going to have to decide at some point, regardless, whether it's something small or something big. We're faced with decisions every single day, every single week, and they don't necessarily ever stop. When you are presented new information, or there's a circumstance that comes up in your life, personal, social, what have you, knowing how you tend to tilt towards certain situations can help you in that. If you know, like in my example, that I tend to tilt towards slowing things down a bit, doing some research, making calculated decisions, maybe a little bit too much at times. I know that about myself, and it was knowing that kept pushing me to continue to do research as I was continuing to try and do marketing solely on my own. There was this voice in my head, or this sense that, there's people out there that say it's worthwhile. Is there anything, there must be some truth there. Why don't I go try and find it? Try and find my version of that. And through that process, and part of that was knowing that, okay, I'm tilting towards skepticism. I tend to do that. There's nothing right or wrong with it. I actually quite enjoy that about myself. But I can't let this deter me from making a fast judgment here that might hamstring me into the future, which would be the risk. So you're going to have to decide at some point anyway. Now, whether or not that's going to be aligned with your intuition it's not necessarily important, but making sure you understand your intention of why you are or why you are not is important, and understanding how you've came to that conclusion. So how are you going to do that, right? How are you going to develop this intuition, or develop the courage to go against that despite feeling uncomfortable? Well, it's really doing things that make you uncomfortable, as uncomfortable as that is to say and to have to contemplate. These decisions that are to be made, they're likely important to you. And so asking yourself, why is this important to myself? How have I prepared for this in the past? Oh, excuse me. How have I prepared for this in the past? why do I believe that I'm feeling good about this? What's so great about this decision? What are the risks of either side? Why do I consider those risks to be risks? Are they? Is it my intuition flagging something that no longer needs to exist in this situation? Or is something that I feel very confident about actually going to be harmful to me if I move forward in this situation? Forecasting a bit. There's no to describe intuition, to describe the feeling of it. It's going with your gut. It's having the sense of alignment where the facts, that's not so much intuition. It's having this sense of alignment with your spirit, I suppose. Spirit, your soul, your destiny, if you will. And having a sense that this is the call to make. However, it doesn't mean that you have to make that call. It just means that that's what that part of you is saying. But again, it lives in the past. And so it lives in the past, but it does also, like your intuition has a general idea of where you're going and where you want to be, but it's saying that in order to get there, refer to your past experiences in order to get there. Let's see. There are, and I'm just reading this little bullet point thing I have. So, like, how do you build this sense that your intuition, building a sense of trust in it to know whether or not it's correct or not? It's a tough question. It's a tough thing to try and phrase. I've been, lucky enough that I've been encouraged my life to make decisions, evaluate the consequences. Was it good or not? Rinse and repeat, and had support along the way, mentors, my parents, friends, and they've helped me develop my sense of intuition and really confidence in myself to know myself well enough to make those sorts of calls about my intuition, about my initial reactions and protracted reactions to things. And I don't always trust myself all the time. That's certainly not the case either. But for most decisions, I'll trust myself, and from my education background, trust also in my abilities to research things and research a topic fairly fully, enough that I feel confident, and to gain that confidence where it's lacking. For people who don't have a well-developed sense of whether or not they can trust themselves, or have an overdeveloped sense, and maybe some people would call that overconfident or egotistical or what have you. Humble might be the word for somebody who has a well-developed sense of their intuition and knows, well, I guess it wouldn't necessarily be humble, but humble about your intuition is how I would phrase it if it was well-developed. Knowing it well enough to know when to rely on it and when not to, and what to do about it when faced with either of those circumstances. So I suppose when you're contemplating a decision to be made and your intuition is aligned with the direction you want to go in, and maybe still doing some research then might be beneficial as well, and not the type that reaffirms your opinions, but wholeheartedly looking at both sides of it, looking for holes in your own arguments. If you were in court, what would a lawyer try and say to pick apart your argument for something or against something? And there's no, like, to develop intuition, there's no one exercise or one thing to do, but it takes, I would say, the most important thing to develop when developing intuition is to develop your courage and trust in yourself to make the call to be uncomfortable at times. And the commitment to yourself to both reap the positive and negative consequences of that, and to move forward despite that, and to continue going on, and to give yourself another chance to try again. There's an element of forgiveness there when it comes to intuition and trusting yourself and developing it, where if there's no chance for forgiveness to yourself or from the other people or circumstances involved, that's when it can get a bit trickier. But what you can do and what you can control, if there's circumstances, if there's other people involved that you can't really control, you can do your best to influence them. But when it's personal matters, you can forgive yourself for making a mistake. It's something that you can do. And to develop intuition, to make the call, and to hopefully, over time make the right call more often than not, it might take failing a few times, and it might take some backstepping. It might involve taking several leaps of faith and being very uncomfortable. But then you'll find something out about yourself. Certainly you will, especially whether or not you made the right call and why. Well, you might not know why, but you'll probably know if you made the right call or not, based on the outcomes of the decision. And from there, you can begin to reflect on why you believe that those outcomes happened, how you can make sure those outcomes happen again into the future, if they were positive, if they were negative, maybe how you can protect against them going forward. But in order to do that, in order to learn, there has to be forgiveness of the mistakes that will be made. Your intuition is by no means perfect. Your intuition, it's always trying to look out for you. But again, where it has this past perspective, this past knowledge, it's not always going to be entirely accurate. And even if it is something where you have seen this type of situation in the past, how you're going to handle it. Maybe you're a different person. Maybe back then you were kinder or meaner. And so this person that you are attempting to become, or these values that you wish to animate you going forward, might not be aligned with your intuition. And so even if in the past you did things in a particular way or said things and you got the results that you wanted, and now you're presented with a similar situation here, does that still align with the direction you want to head in, or is it more so how you've been? And there's nothing wrong or right about either of those things, but to understand, again, it comes back to understand your intentions, your expectations behind a decision is the important part. But so when it comes to making a call, it takes courage to be uncomfortable. Really, it does. But then some of that courage can come, or it might lessen the amount of courage that you need if you know that you'll be forgiven by yourself. And when you're able to forgive yourself and learn, then that develops the intuition, and it's this somewhat feeding cycle. But it goes back the other way too. If you're so afraid of making a mistake, and the consequences of the mistake, that you don't take that risk despite there being something that you want, some sort of change, whatever that is. Then you don't gain that growth or that change. You might, but it might happen at a much slower pace than you would prefer. It might not happen at all. It might be something that happens almost by accident or serendipitousness to it. So yeah, having the courage to fail and the discomfort of that, going on despite it, is in essence how a person develops their intuition over time. Asking, just when you're faced with everyday decisions, asking yourself, why am I doing this? What's the intention there? How do I know that that's true or not? Why is it important for me to be doing this anyway? It's normally with these things, making a decision, and for everyday things, it's, if you want a burger and fries, and you make a snap judgment that your intuition says hell yeah, and maybe the logical part of you is saying we're going down south in a couple months, love to lose 5 pounds, don't do it. But your intuition is saying I really would love a burger and fries. That's not necessarily the things that we're talking about here, like more so things with long-term dramatic effects on your life is where people tend to get stuck in this indecisiveness, because something might feel that it's the correct thing to do or not, and they don't know whether or not they can trust that aspect of themselves. But if you're pursuing something that's important to you and pursuing a decision that's going to have dramatic effects, both positive and negative, then it's worthwhile to spend time contemplating why you're doing it in the first place, and to be okay with failure that might happen. It's these failures is where you're going to learn about yourself, and sometimes at an accelerated fashion. Some people won't make a decision because it will delay certain things. Well, if you're delaying things because you can't decide, well, what about if you'd made the decision, you made a mistake, you have the opportunity to forgive yourself and repair the mistake? How long is that going to take? How long are you going to sit there deciding on one thing over the other? Sometimes too, there is an element of having a leap of faith. You've done enough research, feels generally okay, there's some risks to be aware of. What are some signs of those risks in the early innings after you've made the decision? What might be coming up that I can maybe catch, like if it is a mistake to have done this, what are some signs that I can catch, that I can be aware of, that I can catch earlier on into the mistake unfolding, that maybe I can address before it magnifies? These are things where they all come into play with your intuition and really your judgment. They both go hand in hand. Your sense of making a judgment call. What are your priorities? What do you value? Maybe someone doesn't value speed in this decision. They don't care if it takes them 6 months to decide. They want to make the right decision, and they got all the time to research, to contemplate pros and cons, forecast out certain paths. There's nothing wrong or right with that. But if someone's valuing speed in this decision to be made, and they have a few weeks or a month to decide, they might not have that benefit of having the research. So it comes down to that as well. sometimes, like in all of this, it comes back to, do you trust yourself? Do you trust yourself? Over and over and over again. For some people, it might be starting there. How they might not have a sense of trust in themselves, or even know what to trust somebody or themselves feels like or means. And if you don't have that, then clearly by rights, it's going to make making decisions harder based on your own, what you've decided is important today and what your intuition is saying. What would I say to that? If someone doesn't trust themselves, we'd be looking at why. Yeah, if you work with me, you'll get asked why a lot. Why? Why don't they trust themselves? There's a desire there for trust in yourself. Clearly, there's a desire. This part of you wants to be trusted. Well, why should it be trusted? What evidence is there that it can be trusted? And if there is some things, maybe picking some of those out, highlighting moments where you have made a good decision, helping to motivate and inspire the client that they are in fact a trustworthy individual to themselves, and that they do make decisions that are in their best interests. If not, and they have this string of decisions that they've made that have turned out very poorly, they just get the shit end of the stick all the time, every time that it seems that they make a decision. I would err on the side of forgiveness and reflection, and to reflect on what about certain situations, what about those situations went wrong, their beliefs about why it went wrong, if there is things they can do to change that once they've reflected a bit, had some insights. And to practice forgiveness and acceptance that they are a fallible human being, like we all are. We're going to make mistakes. We're certainly going to make mistakes. But it's what you do after that is the real important part. Are you going to give up and never trust yourself again with another decision and outsource everything that you do in life to the whims of other people? Or are you going to have even just a glimmer of faith in yourself to pursue finding that trust or that faith in yourself even further and further, developing it? There's not one exercise or anything that a person can do to just overnight trust themselves wholeheartedly. It's something that develops over time, develops naturally. And then same with the this distrust that some people feel in themselves or their intuition, that develops over time as well. Oh, sorry, excuse me. But it can be changed. These things can be changed. Your brain is plastic in that it can adapt, and your intuition is always adapting. Starting on small things, whether you're starting on small, insignificant things, trusting yourself, like a small purchase or something that won't have massive negative long-term effects. What's your initial reaction? Only go off of that. What's your initial reaction to something? Take a day or two to do some research, to contemplate it, and then see if you still are thinking the same way, or still feel the same way about it, or think the same way about it after doing a bit of digging into it. Yeah, really though, why is it important to develop this though? As I just said, you spend the most time with yourself in this life, and if you have a sense of trust in yourself, to know yourself both when to trust yourself and when not to, you can make decisions with confidence. You can accept that you did the best you could in that moment with the information that you knew, how you felt about it, your thoughts and beliefs about that situation, and go through life that way, which I'm biased, but I think that that is a better way to go about life, with this individualism or individualistic independence. Yeah, I shouldn't say individualistic, but this independence and agency to pursue life in the directions that you want to, rather than being always at the mercy and whims of other people to make decisions for you for the reasons that they have deemed and they have placed the judgment on as being appropriate in this situation. It's something that I value really above almost everything in my life, is my agency and independence to live life how I want to, and to take acts, within reason, of course, that I perceive as the best option for me because I've decided it. There are some people out there that are perfectly happy having other people take the reins, all the time, or certain periods of time, or for certain categories of decisions. Maybe, for instance, like with work, some people are happy just having limited decision-making ability, and when they go into it, they just want to show up, be given a list of tasks to do, and leave. And there's nothing right or wrong with that. There's other people that want, oh, excuse me, oh, sorry. There's other people that want, maybe full control over what they do work-wise, but around their family household, they're happy to have their spouse or partner take the reins there, and to have less agency over decisions. There's nothing wrong with that either. But again, we'll come back to the importance of understanding why you're going to make a call as the crutch, or as the linchpin to all this, and then having the courage to take leaps of faith when you've warranted that it's necessary, and the forgiveness to yourself when there has been a mistake made, but the forgiveness to try again and to keep going despite the odds, or to keep going despite these setbacks. I think that's really, this video seems like quite the rambling. I'm going to leave it off there. So I hope you enjoy this video, and we'll see you next time.